Thank you, Matt. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caleb Stevens. I'm with USAID's Land and Resource Governance Division, where I work on monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning. And we're here to discuss the results of a survey experiment in Colombia comparing different measures of tenure security perception. Before handing off to the other presenters and panelists, I'd like to first provide a bit of background to this work to help give you more context. As some of you may know, maybe as all of you know, there's been a debate for some time now in the land community as to which measures of tenure security perception may be more reliable and valid. We had the opportunity in Colombia through an impact evaluation to embed a survey experiment to help answer this question and contribute to the debate. And while this question of which measures of tenure security perception are more reliable and valid may seem a bit niche or arcane, it's actually quite fundamental given that many USAID and other donor projects and government policies involve directly or indirectly tenure security and how secure people feel or not. The thinking is if we can somehow contribute to improving the measure of tenure security perception, it then follows that we should have better designed and more effective programs and policies. So with that bit of background, I'll then pass it off to you, Malcolm, to introduce yourself and take us through. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Caleb, and hello, everybody. Great to have you here. Welcome. I'm Malcolm Childress. I'm the Director of Global Land Alliance and also the co-director of Prindex. Just to put a quick frame on this event, for the last really 20 years, the land sector has been gradually and incrementally developing indicators to be able to measure progress. Tenure security, as Caleb mentions, is one of the key areas for measurement, and the perception of tenure security has emerged as one of the central approaches to that kind of indicator, particularly because it's a synthetic indicator. It creates potential for comparability across populations. The Prindex survey instrument is the first indicator of perceptions of tenure security to roll out at a global level, first in 2019, and now in the field collecting another global round in 2023. And there are a lot of surveys and other studies going on which use perception of tenure security. So being able to understand how this indicator works, how it can be comparable, how it can be made more reliable and accurate and useful across those surveys is important. We're very fortunate to have had the great support from USAID and working with Tetra Tech to do this empirical experiment using a data set from Colombia. So I want to really acknowledge and thank USAID for its interest and support in this. And now I will really just turn it over. And also I should mention to all the great reviewers and peers who have been involved in reviewing the work and supporting it. And I will just turn over to our lead research, Denis Nisalov, to take you through the specific content of the work and the conclusions. Denis, over to you.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. My name is Denis Nizalov. I'm a senior land governance advisor for Prindex team and a senior lecturer for De Montfort University. And I've been leading a team of researchers who implemented this project. And I would like to join Malcolm with appreciations for support for everybody who was involved in this study. So during this presentation, I will walk you through the motivation and research questions I will explain the design of the study and methodology we used to address the questions, and we'll present the results of this experiment with policy implications and recommendations. So, as Caleb has mentioned, there are many different ways to measure tenure security that were promoted in different studies, and many of them focus on perceptions of tenure security as one of the most flexible measures to assess security of property rights. In this, however, there is a big question whether the results of those different approaches practiced in various projects and in literature, whether they provide a consistent result, and whether the policy recommendations that are based on different measures of tenure security would be consistent. Unfortunately, up to date, there were not many opportunities to explicitly compare those alternatives, and this is one of the first studies, and we were very fortunate to be able to design an experiment as a part of the impact evaluation study in Colombia. And for this experiment, we have focused on some of the most commonly used measures of perception of tenure security. One that is used by Prindex project in assessment of tenure security in 140 countries, and now we are in the middle of the new round of data collection, as Malcolm has mentioned. And another one is promoted as a measure of SDG indicators designed by FAO, World Bank, and UN Habitat, and is nowadays used in several household surveys, and again, quite popular. However, these two approaches rely on very different scales of measuring perception of tenure security. And as Caleb has mentioned, that raised a lot of debates within our community. So with this experiment, we tried to see whether the use of different scales for measuring tenure security would associate with consistent or different results. And in one case, it is 4-point symmetric scale used by Prindex, and in other case, it is 5-point asymmetric scale. And I will show you the examples in details on the next slide. So using the 5-point scale, the respondents are provided with 4 options to assess or self-assess their feeling of tenure security. And these options are very unlikely, unlikely, which are associated with positive outcome or secure tenure, and somewhat likely and very likely, which would be associated with negative outcome or insecure perception of tenure. The alternative that was used in this study is consistent with FAO World Bank methodology, and they provide 5 options for respondents to respond to the questions about tenure security. Not at all likely, which is a positive outcome, and 4 negative outcomes: slightly likely, moderately likely, very likely, or extremely likely that individuals would lose their property rights over the next 5 years. There are other alternatives practiced, as I have mentioned. Even within Prindex study, we have several instruments that ask people about worry about different aspects of tenure security. Our colleagues from NORC used yet another version of a 5-point symmetric scale for assessing tenure security. So there is a range of potential ways to measure tenure security, but the question remains the same: whether all these different approaches would provide for consistent estimates of perception of tenure security for a particular population, and how the results collected with alternative measurement scales can be compared across populations and samples, and which of the alternative measures is associated with a higher quality of data. Finally, we look at whether the difference in quality and classification between alternative measures of tenure security is consistent across different subpopulations, such as divided by gender across municipalities, forms of tenure, and so on. So this is the primary focus of this research. And in order to answer these questions, we have designed and implemented an experimental study in Colombia. And in this experimental study, the respondents were provided with two options, whether to respond to tenure security question using 4-point scale or 5-point scale for self-assessment of tenure security. And these two alternatives were distributed randomly to the respondents, and nobody knew ahead of time which of the two instruments they are responding or using for data collection. The experiment was implemented in Colombia in May, July of 2021, and to assess the quality of data and reliability of data, we used a proxy measure of tenure security estimated with a structural equation model. We call it true perception of tenure security, and we'll talk about this later. So to begin with, let's just focus for a moment on sort of theory behind this question, which measure of tenure security provides for a higher quality, or what may be the source of potential inconsistency across different measures. And the source of such potential inconsistency is related to measurement errors associated with different scales. So whatever instrument we are using, we may come up with a systematic bias in assessment of tenure security. So in order to assess the presence of such bias, the survey methodology has provided us with technique called multi-trial, multi-method estimation technique or methodology that effectively compares the two alternatives of interest to some sort of a yardstick, or the third measure of tenure security. And by default, this methodology assumes that all these three alternatives should be asked the same people. However, in case of assessment of tenure security, and particularly in the case of data collection in Colombia, we had to face several limitations in implementing this methodology. So we had to augment the standard methods for estimation of such biases. And we relied on so-called split ballot multi-trial, multi-method methodology, where our sample was split randomly into two subpopulations. And one question, the yardstick question, or set of questions in our case, was asked to all participants, and the two alternatives were randomly assigned to two subpopulations within the sample. In terms of setting up the experiment was implemented in some of the most affected communities by war in Colombia. And on this map, you can see the location of the so-called comparison communities for the LFP project. These are the places where the data was collected. And on this slide, you can see how many observations were collected in each of these communities using each of the two alternative instruments, and the size of the sample allow us to estimate the difference with 5% margin of error. So when we collected the data, the first question was whether the experiment was implemented correctly from the statistical point of view, whether the two samples using 5-point scale and 4-point scales are identical in all respect but the use of the experimental question. And on this slide, we can see some of the key statistics for variables used in this study. And you can see that pretty much we have no difference, and clearly no statistical difference, across some of the core variables responded by respondents in each of these subsamples. And the same result is true for pretty much all socioeconomic and demographic variables used for this survey. And we can see that the margin of error, in fact, is quite small, 3.3, 3.4% in each of these two subsamples. So that means that if we observe any difference in the measures of in the alternative measures of tenure security, this difference would be due to the design of these instruments, but not because these samples are different. And indeed, if we look at the outcome of our assessment of tenure security, we can see some of the difference in distribution of responses. So respondents in both of these subsamples had to answer the same question, which uses the wording from the Prindex survey. In the next 5 years, how likely or unlikely it is that you could lose the right to use this property or part of this property against your will. And in one subsample, the respondents were responding this question using 4 alternatives. In other subsample, 5 alternatives. And you can see on the screen that the distribution of responses on this histogram is similar but different, right? And the question is, how do we compare this difference? How to make sense out of this difference, and how can we draw conclusions whether this observed difference is significant enough or not? We relied on 3 types of assessment. We used linguistic comparison. We converted our responses into binary measure using each of these 2 alternative scales. And then we performed the correlation with our proxy measure of tenure security, which we call true perception of tenure security. Talking about linguistic analysis, we have noticed that the more complex is the structure of the scale, the larger number of categories, the more nuanced language the survey has to use. And what happened in case of 5-point scale, the surveyors have reported back to us that respondents were complaining that the language that was used for that scale was too academic and not quite clear. And in fact, when we try to improve translation of this language, what happened that the second category highlighted in yellow on this slide, from negative category in English language, was translated in something that has a more positive connotation in Spanish language. And if we back translate it to English, it is in fact has more positive meaning. We were lucky enough that during the same time in the same municipalities, our colleagues from NORC have conducted their own study looking at the same population, and they used yet another alternative for 5-point scale, but in this case symmetric, where they had 2 positive and 2 negative categories and a middle category neutral, which was, unfortunately, when we looked at the linguistic comparison, was not quite clear to respondents. They couldn't clearly or easily interpret this meaning. And these difficulties are related to the language skills of the target population and the level of education of the target population that we are trying to survey. When we compare the results between the 2 scales, we use the second approach by converting these alternative outcomes from 4-point scale to binary outcomes, secure or insecure, by putting 2 positive categories as secure, very unlikely, or unlikely, and the remaining negative was negative outcome. With a 5-point scale, we had to put into the positive category the top two outcomes, not at all likely and slightly likely, which is in English has a negative connotation, but in the Spanish version had a positive connotation. So this case highlights the importance of correct interpretation of the middle categories in the asymmetric scales, and whether we put some of these categories into positive or negative outcomes may potentially change the results dramatically. When we computed these binary outcomes, you can see that in this case, both instruments provide a relatively similar results. Statistically, we cannot detect a difference between the binary outcomes, whether we use originally 4-point scale or 5-point scale for data collection. There are different ways how the binary outcomes can be computed. For comparison, we look at the way when the extreme tenure security was assessed, where the top outcomes in 4-point scale was considered as extremely secure, and the top outcome in 5-point scale was considered insecure. In this case, the difference between the two alternatives is larger. However, the difference is not significant. And yet, another alternative presented here is if we look at assessment of insecurity level. And again, the difference is not significant whether we use 4-point scale or 5-point scale. While we observe this relative similarity in binary outcomes, the question remains, how can we assess the quality of data associated with each of the scale? And for that, we have to again go back to the theory for a moment and just remind ourselves that if we compare the outcomes between two respondents who reply to two different instruments, what we observe is the combination of the difference between the true assessment of tenure security or internal, some results of measurement errors or bias associated with each instrument, and some random error. And the source of the biases associated with each instrument is that when an individual looks at the responses in front of them when they ask a question, they try to match internal assessment or their feelings of tenure security to the options that they face in the question. And sometimes they may have a mismatch between how they feel and the options or comprehension of the options that they face. And sometimes this mismatch may be large or small, and that's what we are trying to assess looking at the quality of data. So in order to do that, we assess the reliability and validity of data collected with each of these two instruments. And these measures of data quality were assessed against a synthetic or proxy measure of tenure security, so-called true perception of tenure security. We can remember the previous model that I have shown to you, that we are comparing the results collected with each of the instruments to a yardstick. However, if we compare these two alternatives to any variable, single variable in our data set, such as whether a person worries about tenure security, the correlation between the two instruments and the yardstick may pick up some common features in design of the yardstick variable and the alternative of interest. To avoid this, we used 11 alternative measures of perception tenure security to predict the common feature or common variation across all these 11 alternatives, and we call this prediction of the common trend the true perception of tenure security, which is unobservable and estimated with the structural equation model. So when we compute this predictive true perception of tenure security, that becomes a continuous variable with sort of negative outcomes associated with the more secure assessment or lower values in our original variables, and positive values are associated with more insecure outcomes. And there is no difference, no statistical difference in the values of this predicted variable across our two samples, 4-point scale and 5-point scale. So in order to reply to our question about the quality of data, we assess the correlation between the variables collected in survey and the predicted value of true tenure security. And what we can see on this table, that the data quality associated with 4-point scale correspond to 0.89%. So the true perception of tenure security explains 89% of correlation or variation in the 4-point measure of tenure security, while with 5-point scale, the true perception explains 93%, which is higher, slightly higher than in the case of 4-point scale. However, this difference is not significant. The higher percentage of variation in perception associated with 5-point scale is likely to be because with larger number of categories, this variable is able to capture more of variation in true perception of tenure security. Another interesting finding in this table is that we can assess not only the quality of data for two variables of interest, for two likely based outcomes with 5-point scale and 4-point scale, but we also were able to assess other alternative measures of tenure security used by Prindex. First of all, worry-based question, whether a person worries about losing the property rights. And what we can see on this table, that all other alternatives are not performing as well as the likely-based question. So the likelihood-based question in assessment of tenure security among the alternatives we consider is the strongest measure in assessment of tenure security. So, but by how much we may or how large we may see the bias in assessment tenure security associated with each of the two alternatives we had in our study. In order to answer this question, we had to convert the predicted value of tenure security, this true perception of tenure security, in the same number of categories as we used in our original scale. So it is either 4 categories or 5 categories. And while doing this exercise, we also try to see whether there is any optimal number of categories, how the perceptions of tenure security can be categorized. And the short answer that there is no single number of categories, and I will talk about that later if we have time. But when we compare the predicted values of our perception of tenure security split into 4 categories or 5 categories against the original results, some interesting outcomes are observed. So if we compare with original data collected with 4-point scale, we can see that 89% of observations match between the predicted categories and collected or reported categories in the data. And you can see the numbers for each individual category. While with 5-point scale, this match is much lower. It's only 33% of the observations belong to the same category as predicted. And this difference or this low match highlights that individuals have some sort of misunderstanding or misperception of the labels of the categories provided by this scale. However, we also were able to check whether conversion of the responses into binary scale, secure or insecure, can fix this problem or can lower the bias associated with each of the alternative scale. And the answer is indeed yes. Conversion into binary scale helps. So if the data from 4-point scale converted into the binary scale, 94% of observations match the predicted binary categories. And with 5-point scale, this match is even higher, 99%. That means that if we would like to compare across different instruments, converting the outcomes into binary response may help to avoid some of the misperceptions or some biases across the finer categories within each of the scales. And the binary scale is recommended for comparison across different instruments, given that we are asking these questions to the same population about the same type of property. And while I'm mentioning the same type of property and same type of tenure, I would like to highlight the important difference that we observe in the way responders responded to the tenure security questions across the forms of tenure. On this slide, we can see the percentage of people who feel secure or insecure across owners, renters, and family users, depending what scale was used originally for data collection. And we can see that the difference between the two alternative instruments is not that large. However, the big difference is detected between or among the forms of tenure. So owners feel the most secure about their property rights, while renters feel the most insecure about their property rights. And somewhere in the middle are users of family of property that belongs to other family members. The point from this result is that if we would like to compare across different surveys across different instruments, it is critical to look at the same form of tenure. So, for example, if one survey assess tenure security of property owners only, we need to compare the results with owners only from a different surveys, not mixing with other forms of tenure. So to summarize the findings, what I would like to highlight that no matter which scale we're using, 4-point scale or 5-point scale, both of these two alternatives can produce data with fairly high quality of data. And definitely the question that is based on likelihood of losing the property rights is a better alternative than any other alternatives considered in this study, such as questions based on worrying about losing property rights. And there is no right or wrong way to categorize the perception of tenure security into 4 or 5 categories, but the important point is to be consistent when we are trying to implement cross-country or cross-population studies so that we can compare apples to apples. And if we yet have to compare across different instruments and different countries, it is critical to convert the results into the binary scale so that we can minimize the bias associated with nuanced scales or differences in translation of scales into different languages. What is critically important is to correctly classify the middle points in the 5-point scale into secure or insecure category when we classify or reclassify our data into binary variable. Depending on whether we classify it correctly, we may be consistent with 4-point scale or our results may be completely off. And that means that we have to be careful, and this is sort of a risk factor that we may misclassify the middle category. So in summary, in terms of recommendations, we would use these results to support the recommendation to use 4-point scale for any cross-country, cross-language comparisons, since the 4-point scale is more robust for some misclassification and errors in translations. While longer 5-point scale is a very good instrument for studies that look at some small changes or nuances in perception of tenure security, such as studies looking at impact evaluation of various policy interventions. And for comparison, it's critical to convert to binary scale, but correctly classifying the middle category. And we need to compare the same type of property and forms of tenure if we are comparing across different results. In terms of further improvements from this study, we can see that both scales can be improved, but with 5-point scale, a little bit more careful work is needed to change the labels that they match more closely to the distribution of true perception of tenure security, so that we have more positive categories than negative. And the standard labels have to be developed and tested across multiple languages for future cross-national, cross-country studies of perception of tenure security. And that comparison and development of such labels should be the focus of follow-up research, which we plan to implement using Prindex data. And we also think that the LFP study has a very strong potential for having a positive results on perception, and some impact evaluation at the end of this project will be very useful. Also, we can see that there are opportunities to further improve labels and scales, but that would be a focus of the follow-up studies. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to respond to your questions.